for a second there was hope for a baseball season. There really was. I think Rob Manfred knew they were in the 0 hour. It was desperation time. He met up with Tony Clark, head of the Major League Players Association, and they kind of started to etch out what a season could look like. And they came out of it with a lot of hope. 60 games, full prorated pay for the players. Finally, things were starting to come into fruition. It seemed like we were inches away from having a season. And the players said, you know what, 60 games, better than 48, we would all agree. How about we do 70? Let's do 70 games. That's close to halfway. I think that's a reasonable deal. And the owners not only rejected that, they were downright offended that the players even countered with an offer like that. If you read some of the tweets, they were saying, oh, this deal, it's dead on arrival. This is preposterous. It's the worst deal yet. I'm so blown away by that response. They acted as though someone had kidnapped their mothers. Guys, it's 10 games. It's 10 bleeping games. You throw in a couple double headers, you can knock that out in a week. This is insanity. This goes beyond being so rich that you become stupid. I think they're mentally unwell. It's 10 games.
Welcome to episode 9 of The Media's Input. I am your host, James A. Paxson. To check out previous interviews and this interview, go to the YouTube channel James Paxson. Episode 8 had Mandy Martin, who is the host from 10 to 3 on Mix 106.3 in Saginaw, WGER. That was a good interview, and today we have a very special interview because, in my opinion, we have one of the best young baseball voices out there. He has the Locked On Tigers podcast. If there was a season going on, you'd see his post-game videos on Twitter where he is hilarious, and I enjoyed every single ounce of content this guy has. Mr. Chris Castellani. Chris, how are we doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the intro. And yeah, it would be there's a lot of content you would be seeing right now if baseball decided to play. But I'm doing the best I can, and I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, of course, man. Absolutely. It's definitely not the best that baseball has ever looked, but hopefully they can get something going and we can get a season going on, and we can actually watch some baseball games.
That'd be the dream, right? I mean, it's so weird that we're at a point where we're just begging to watch a game at this point, but the way things have gone, it's not super surprising.
What would be funny to me, and I thought about this the other day, is if there is an MVP and somehow a pitcher wins from only playing like 10 games.
It would be a weird Cy Young and MVP race. I mean, everything about it's going to be weird. Like, as much as I want to see it, just because it's better for content, I want to watch baseball. It will be one. There will be a lot of, and understandably so, a lot of people who will try to discredit whatever individual or team accomplishments are made, no matter what, just because it's such an incomplete amount of games. I mean, it's been well documented. Even if there is a 60-game season, the Nationals had the same record as the Tigers after 50 games last year. The Tigers went on to lose 114. The Nationals won the whole thing. So it would definitely be incomplete, and there would be a lot of people trying to discredit it. But if it's the best you can do, it's the best you can do.
Do you think if there is a season, whoever wins the World Series, do they deserve any credit? Or are you thinking, a little asterisk, it's still very hard to win a World Series?
I wouldn't say an asterisk, but there will forever be that skepticism, that doubt that they didn't go through the full grind. The one dispute that I would have to that claim is that it's not their fault. You can only play the amount of games placed before you. And I do think, and maybe I'm naive, if you have the expanded postseason, I think once we get into the swing of things, I think there will be fewer people who are going to kind of discredit or fewer who are going to discredit the accomplishments, because people forget. You go back in another sport, LeBron won his first championship in I think like a 56-game season, right? In the NBA, where there was a lockout in 2012. Nobody remembers that, because by the time you get into it, and by the time you deal with the grind of a postseason, people just kind of overlook that. Now, a 60-game Major League Baseball season, there will still be a fair amount of skepticism, but I think you can only play the amount of games that are on your schedule, and whoever's the last team standing does deserve the credit that will come their way.
Are you absolutely done with pitchers hitting? Would you like the universal DH?
I'm ready for a universal DH. I understand the novelty completely. I mean, there have been some remarkable moments. Obviously the one everyone points to is Bartolo in 2016 going deep. But then you even have some guys that are consistently just pretty solid athletes and pretty solid hitters. Your Zach Greinke's, your Madison Bumgarners, your Jake Arrietas. But as neat as that novelty is, for every Madison Bumgarner, there's a Randy Johnson, or a Ben Sheets, one of these guys who's going to get one or two. Yeah, exactly. One of these guys who's going to get one or two hits a season. And I think, in a sport where I think it helps seeing pitchers go deeper into games. You're not going to have to worry about taking them out after the 5th or 6th inning because you have the pitcher spot due up. I think that helps. And also, in general, the sport, and there's a lot of, controversy surrounding this, and understandably so, the sport has seen a massive spike in home runs and runs scored over the last couple of years. And if you want to continue with that trend, which I think Major League Baseball does, it would only help having another legit hitter in the lineup as opposed to a pitcher. I understand, the purists who believe in the strategy of the game. I just think that there is still a whole lot of strategy to baseball that you can have while incorporating the DH rule.
If you could change one thing about the sport permanently, what would you change?
Man, that's a really good question. There's several. I do, as much as I think Rob Manfred is completely misguided in his pace of play stuff. I think that the intentions there are fairly pure. But honestly, one of the ones I would point to would probably be universal DH, just because it makes zero sense why the National League and the American League are so split on that. It's one of those weird things that you have to explain, especially because I think there probably was a time in which those two leagues were completely different. But now that you have had, 20 plus years of interleague incorporation, it's like it's no different than saying, at Western Conference games in the NBA, you get to play on a 9-foot rim. Like it's just one of those weird quirks. And I understand it's one of those things that a lot of people think makes baseball pure, but that's probably one of the ones I would point to or be like, I'd be completely fine with with a DH in both leagues. And in general, there's some other small things, but a lot of it aren't really rule changes as much as I think pitchers, especially starting pitchers, I wouldn't say they're coddled, but I think that there's not as much trust as there used to be. And I'm as big an analytics and sabermetrics guy as anybody, but I think that we see good pitchers getting taken out of the game after 5-6 innings. And I think that when they still seemingly, despite the pitch count, might have a lot left in the tank, that's something I would like to see kind of a change. And I think hopefully a team like the Nationals going on that deep run last year with a very thin bullpen might be something that kind of might turn baseball back into that direction, realizing the importance of having starting pitchers that are going to go 7-8 innings for you. I would love to see that.
Well, the universal DH thing, I think it's weird we're still talking about it ever since the Astros went to the American League, because they put 15 teams and 15 teams, and in a 3 or 4 game matchup, you have one team that's going to either have to get the advantage of using a DH or have to use a pitcher if they're at the National League ballpark. So that's why I've always thought it was weird.
Yeah, well, completely. And I think it is something absolutely that hurt the Tigers in 2 different World Series. Now, look, they played terrible in 06 and 2012 in the World Series, but you look at who was hitting well for them at the time, especially in 2012. You take a guy who in Delmon Young, who was the ALCS MVP, you have to move him to left field, a clear defensive liability. I think that stuff, it like I said, I understand how some people believe that it messes with the strategy of the game, but I just think it makes the game more interesting having a DH in place.
Yeah, and I think you already brought it up, but the main reason I'd like to have a DH universal is so I don't have to worry about taking Max Scherzer out of the game in the 6th inning when he has 8 strikeouts and only giving up 3 hits. Like, he could still go longer innings. So that's one reason I think the universal DH should just happen as soon as possible.
No, I'm with you, dude.
So when you view content, you're a big movies and sports guy. Mm-hmm. How did you become really big into movies and sports, those two?
Well, what's funny? I've been doing interviews on shows off and on for, several years now. And it's a question I've never been asked, and it's never really something I'd thought about. I guess if I had to give you a full explanation, I'm a very emotional person, and I put this on full display in all of my content. And I'm always really blown away by the power that sports and cinema can have. I believe that a great sports team or a great sporting event, can inspire us. And I believe that a great film or a great film series can really change you. And I find the power that something really so small in the grand scheme of things can have so fascinating. And I'm drawn to that. I'm drawn to people's imagination, people's ability to create, whether it be in sports or in film.
What do you think is the best sports movie ever?
Moneyball. And I know it's fairly recent, but to me, that one stands out. And I love Miracle from 2004. I think Moneyball stands out. I think as a script, I think it's almost flawless. Aaron Sorkin's writing is amazing. But I just think in general that movie so captures it finds a way to make the business side of baseball extremely interesting, but it so captures the purity of the sport, and that's kind of reflected in Brad Pitt's character arc. He kind of starts the movie as kind of this hard ass who's completely hell-bent on bringing home a championship, and through the experiences that season and through his relationship with his daughter, he kind of learns that the ultimate importance is kind of the steps you take along the way, even if the final step isn't exactly what you want. So that's always one that stands out. That's a movie every time it's on TV I have to watch it. So that is, I think, my favorite.
What's one of the worst sports movies you've ever seen?
Oh man. There was one, it was like 10, 20 years ago with Matt LeBlanc about a chimp who played baseball. I can't even remember. Ed, I think was the name of it. Yeah, that was one I remember. I think I even watched that as a kid, and even I said, I don't think this is very good. That's one that stands out. Usually, more often than not, sports movies are usually pretty solid, but that was, I remember that one being a clunker.
I mean, I love sports movies because I like movies and sports just like you. But my one main concern is half the time the plays that happen, it's like, that's not really going to happen in sports.
Right. Well, that's to me is what made Moneyball so intriguing, is that was a streak, and Miracle the same way as well. Those are stories that actually did go down,
Right.
as improbable as they may seem. And they didn't sugarcoat Moneyball. Like, that team, as great as that streak was, and as much as that the incorporation of analytics did change the game, they fell short of their ultimate goal. And the movie doesn't shy away from showing that, they came up short in the ALDS that year against the Twins. And I think it's you are able to tell when a film is able to take those crazy creative liberties, especially as a sports fan. You can tell when they kind of jump the shark. But those are a pair of movies I feel like never did.
So where did the idea come to do the Tigers post-game videos?
Well, I mean, I like baseball a lot, and I like the Tigers a lot more than anyone else I knew. I wanted to do something with that, and at the time I wasn't trying to make it something more. I was in college at the time. I just wanted a hobby, and at the time I started on Vine back in 2016. These little 7-second recaps, and Vine got discontinued, which ended up being kind of the best thing that ever happened, because I expanded it to Twitter when Vine was discontinued, and a lot of it just kind of stemmed from boredom. I just wanted to talk baseball, and when I originally started, I didn't care if I was talking to 1 or 1,000 people. As time has gone on, I'd be lying if I said that growing the size of my audience wasn't something that's become important to me. But at the time, I just wanted someone to talk to, and that someone was Twitter, and it became really an incredible outlet. I've said this a million times. I'll say it again. I didn't expect it to grow the way it did. I figured because it was kind of a niche thing, and it was something that, at least in the Detroit sports market, people weren't doing. I figured there would be an audience, a bit of growth, but I didn't expect it to expand the way it did. And I never expected to do other sports either. It's grown into, University of Michigan stuff and Michigan State stuff, and, football and basketball. But originally it was just a guy who wanted to talk about the Tigers on Twitter, and it definitely grew, and I'm proud of it.
Is it exciting every single time you see a video reach expectations that you never thought it would? Or does that make you think, you know what, instead of this many views, I want to get this many views next time?
There does become I'd be lying if I said there hasn't been points where I'm like, I want to see how much this one can get to. But the thing is, when I just do things, those are the videos that turn out the best. When I make a video and I have done this before. I think especially like 2018, I remember I was really kind of struggling with this, was if you make a video with the expectation of, I can't wait to see how many likes or how many retweets this gets, those aren't the ones that translate, because people can spot phoniness. People can spot fakeness. And when I've been remarkably genuine, even to a fault, even stuff like way early on that I have a hard time going back and watching, I still like, I understand why they blew up the way they did, because people like that genuineness, and people are drawn to that. So it does become very exciting though when you have one that you know is going to hit. And sometimes I just film one and I say, this one bangs. People are going to respond really positively to this, and it makes me really excited. And it does become a very fun thing, but you try not to get too lost in it, because you don't want your entire world to be consumed by it. To be consumed by, oh, I'm at a point now, well, this video didn't get X amount of likes, this must mean that I did something wrong. That's not even always the case. Sometimes it is just luck. It's just a matter of who sees it and who retweets it and how it grows.
So, being someone who's a diehard Tigers fan and loves the sport of baseball, where do you think the general fan base of the sport is right now? Do you think there are people who are so mad at how baseball has done all these negotiations and haven't started playing that they're going to go away? Do you think there's people in baseball who are struggling to have the passion for the game that you or I have? Where do you think the general average fan base is for the sport of Major League Baseball?
Well, I look at it like this, and I'll make a film analogy, right? It's being a baseball fan is kind of like being a Star Wars fan, right? Where you will criticize it. You may be angry towards certain creative decisions, but at the end of the day, every time a new film comes out, you will be in the front of the line to see it. But Major League Baseball's goal is not to necessarily appeal to me, because or to me or you, because we're gonna be there. And I've even said that, like, if they cancel the season this year, I'm gonna be there opening day 2021. And it's not just baseball. It's every sport's goal is not to appeal to those who will never leave. It's to appeal to the fringe people. And right now, I think that you are on the risk of seeing all those fringe people turn their back on a sport that doesn't want to play. And I can't blame them. And it's your inability to win those people back is what could end up killing the sport. It's not losing people like you or me who are going to be there. And I think in general, there is a lot of people who share those sentiments. They might not be as vocal even, but it just might be one of those things. Somebody who, let's say, your typical fan right now, who would be like, yeah, if baseball came back, I'd watch it. But a year from now, if they go without playing a season, and it's June 22nd, 2021, and there's baseball on TV, they might be more inclined to change the channel if they see it on. And it's those people who are trying, kind of keeping the popularity of the sport afloat. And all that is in danger of being completely nullified because of these just remarkably frustrating labor negotiations that have gone on.
What percent of the blame goes to the owners, and then what percent goes to the players?
That's a good question. I'll put it at 85% owners. I think that, because I've gone back and forth with it, because it is very trendy in today's society to rip billionaires. So and I didn't want to be that guy, but the fact of the matter is, there was no explanation as to why these players shouldn't be given the full prorated salaries. And Dallas Braden, who's, he works for the A's, used to be a pitcher, and he's, he works for Barstool now, made a very good point where it's like, look, when you're a player, if you're lucky, you have a 10-year window in which you're in the black, in which you're making money. Everything after that is kind of up to you. Whereas these owners will make money that, they started making money before they ever became owners of a baseball team, and they're going to be making money when they eventually sell the team, and they're always going to, be producing revenue and making cash. And so I thought the whole negotiations regarding the prorated salary was ridiculous. There is a 15% though, and I'd even almost bump it up to 20, but right now I'd leave it at that 15%, that recently has gotten under my skin regarding the players, because they've negotiated, and I get that. But recently they dropped a whole, you know what, we're frustrated by this, we're done with this, just tell us when and where. And then all of a sudden these, few COVID cases started to spike again, which really confused me because I think that was kind of a general expectation that once you got these guys back together, COVID cases were probably going to go up. The goal was not to stop the virus. It was to flatten the curve. And now they're kind of pulling back and being like, well, we don't know if it's safe. So that bothers me. But in general, I feel like you could have had a season going or at least in place for about a month. But it's been the owners dragging their feet through the mud that has stopped this whole process and cut down the amount of games that we could have probably played.
It's embarrassing to me how baseball was so much easier than basketball and hockey, because basketball and hockey had to find a championship and a way to do playoffs after they've completed 75% of their season.
Exactly.
Let alone baseball, you didn't start. You could have basically started and then finished your season perfectly.
Right. Somewhere along the line, somebody I'm sure it was an owner, got it in their heads that they can save X amount of money if they negotiate through this. There should have been very few negotiations, but somebody, believed that they could probably, end up producing a bit more revenue by doing this. And I understand the frustration. You don't have fans, you don't have concessions, but, you're also, I think your main goal as an owner, and maybe I'm naive in believing this, your main goal when you own a baseball team, you own 1/30th of a massive conglomerate, of a massive corporation. And your goal year in and year out should be to find a way to play the sport at all costs. And these are unprecedented circumstances, and I understand that, but it doesn't make this whole process any less frustrating.
So we're going to move on to Michigan football. And I really want to ask you this question because I know you work for Maize n Brew and you're a Michigan football fan. What grade would you give Jim Harbaugh just as the University of Michigan head coach?
Well, you kind of got to give it I will give my ultimate grade, but just kind of explaining my thought process here. You kind of have to use two different scales because in most environments, this is not my official grade, but in most environments, he's like a B or B plus because he's won games, program is relevant, they're making a ton of money, which is something that in the Rich Rod and especially the Hoke eras, they were starting not to do. I mean, they were losing fans. The big house was not being filled the way it used to be. They weren't producing the revenue that they used to. So in that aspect, he's done a lot right. The program is relevant, and every year they're in contention for a Big Ten title. They never win one, but they're in contention. So all that is good. But Jim Harbaugh wasn't hired to be good. And based on the expectations in place, to me, you got to give him like a C minus. And I even think I'm kind of being generous with that because in terms of championships, the Harbaugh era has been an objective failure. I like him. I think there's many things he's done that have probably gone overlooked. Guys are staying out of trouble for the most part. They're graduating on time. The team's doing very well academically. He's putting guys in the NFL. But we all know in the landscape of college football, and especially at the University of Michigan, what it's all about here. He was hired to be a champion and he hasn't been. And for that, I gotta give him probably like a C minus.
Is it fair for us to grade him and make sure we're grading him because he's at the University of Michigan instead of being at Rutgers? Or should we grade him as general a coach of a college football team regardless of where he's coaching?
I think you got to do it based on the program because I just feel like, especially at a university that pumps the amount of resources into their program like Michigan does, I think you have to base it on whatever program he's at. And that's why there people who use the overrated conversation. That's fine, but it's when people try to say he's not a good football coach that's ridiculous because if he was doing this, which I think he could in Illinois or at a Rutgers, people would be clamoring about how he's a top 5 coach in the country. I think a perfect example of this is you look at Pat Fitzgerald's record at Northwestern, not sparkling, but when you consider the resources, consider the fact it's essentially an Ivy League school in the Big Ten, the fact that he has won 10 games there in the past, the fact that he's made it to bowl games and won bowl games, he's made it to Indy, everyone I think would grade him on a, probably an A minus, A or B plus level. But they went 3-9, 4-8 last season, and nobody batted an eyelash. Whereas if Harbaugh were to do that at Michigan, people would want him fired, and understandably so. You got to base it on the caliber of recruits. You got to base it on the amount of resources and money being pumped into the program because Michigan, as much as people might deny it, there is an undeniable history there, the same way that there is with Alabama, or the same way you look at another sport, it is with like Duke basketball or Kentucky basketball. They will always be able to recruit. They will always be able to pump in a ton of money into their program. They will always have great facilities and great resources. But it's what you do with those resources that we're gonna judge these coaches on. And while he's done a remarkably, exponentially better job than the two previous coaches that came before him, he has still failed to reach the lofty expectations.
If you could pick one coach in the Big Ten who you think is the best, who would it be right now?
I mean, I don't want to say Ryan Day, but I feel like I kind of have to, simply because I think, we wondered without Urban Meyer how Ohio State would respond. And we knew they'd be very good because Meyer just recruited like crazy. I mean, he's bringing in NFL caliber talent, but you watch that offense last year and you realize that in a very small way, like to a certain extent, maybe they were held back a little bit, because it seemed like, as great as Dwayne Haskins was, that became kind of a one-dimensional football team in 2018. You have Dobbins and Fields and this unbelievable offensive juggernaut, and I feel like they improved defensively last year as well. Ultimately, that was they got lost in kind of a fluky, controversial game to Clemson, but he's the one that stands out. He's yet to lose a Big Ten game. I guess if we're talking guys who have some, so who've been around for a minute, I think James Franklin does a wonderful job. I think there's issues with him as a coach. Clock management has been an issue. Some play calling has been an issue, but you look at what he's done. He's won a Big Ten championship. He's won 11 games pretty consistently. He's put a lot of guys in the NFL. He has completely transformed the offense, and he was hired. I think Bill O'Brien was there for 2 years, and while he left the program in pretty good standing, all things considered, they were still in the wake of a massive, massive scandal, and he took over and has pretty much put them back to right where they were, if not better than where they were.
I'm not going to argue with you. Two great names, but if you're going to talk about great Big Ten coaches, I think you got to add Paul Chryst. And
I think he does a great job too. Yeah, there's several, and I think you could even throw Kurt Ferentz in there. I think Kurt Ferentz's consistency has been remarkable. I think he's got one true Big Ten title, but he's won a ton of games there. No, I mean it's a really good league for coaches right now. I mean, you have two guys, in kind of some of the lower level programs, in Lovie Smith, who I think started to finally kind of turn the program around a little bit last year. And as much as it's going to take time, I don't think there's any other guy likely to turn Rutgers around, whatever that means, than Schiano will. It's a very loaded conference for coaches with really solid pedigrees.
So I've seen some of your movie reviews, and the Spider-Man one was cool to watch. I definitely like that one.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. But last year, the 2019 year, what was the top 3 films for Chris?
Well, I thought 2019 was actually a really excellent year for movies. I would say was one of the reasons why I just decided to kind of get back on YouTube, was I was seeing, especially near the end of the year, a lot of really great films. The ones that stood out to me, the first one would be Joker. It's a movie that I wonder how it's going to age as time goes on, but I was just blown away by its existence. For a mainstream film in 2019 to be that raw and that brutal and unflinching, and I mean this in the best way, but that ugly, I thought was really an achievement. I love what Todd Phillips did there, and that's coming from someone whose favorite film probably of all time is The Dark Knight. Like, that is a character that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and I was very skeptical of seeing an origin film of the Joker, but I thought they did a really incredible job. And Joaquin Phoenix's performance was mesmerizing. I thought Jojo Rabbit was an amazing movie. I would say in terms of screenplay, it was spectacular. I mean, basically a flawless screenplay. I think Taika Waititi is a genius. And I think the surprising depth to a story that could have been very one note was just great. One of the more moving films I've seen in recent years. And 1917, I think, as a technical achievement, was up there amongst some of the best films I've seen recently. I think Sam Mendes as a director was just spectacular. His films always look good, but I mean, that was such a tall order, trying to make it look like one continuous shot. And I gave you 3, but I will have to throw it out. I thought, throw another one out there. I thought Avengers Endgame, obviously, the whole world has seen it by now, but as a conclusion to a 22 film arc was about as satisfying as it gets, especially that last third. So I would say those are my picks.
Okay, so I'd love to get your opinion on my three favorite movies of last year.
Okay.
I loved Uncut Gems.
Great.
I love Parasite,
Mhm.
and I love Midsummer. Midsummer was this crazy, weird, awesome movie to watch that I've seen a couple times now where I know the ending, but I gotta see how this weird, crazy movie is gonna end. And I loved Midsummer. It may have been my favorite movie last year.
I heard it was great. That's the one I haven't seen. I got to get around to seeing that. I heard it was wonderful. I thought Uncut Gems was great. I think the Safdie brothers are really remarkable directors. I think they have an incredible style. It's the best performance of Sandler's career. I mean, just as a dramatic actor, I think there's a lot of things. It's a movie I've grown to actually appreciate more over time, just because I think that there were so many things they had to juggle, and they ended up getting most of them right. And that Parasite is one that, I completely understand why it won Best Picture. I completely understand all the people who say it's like a perfect movie. I get it. I do. I think it's amazing. It's well acted. It's remarkably well written and directed. It's very relevant. It didn't connect with me the way it connected with some other people, and it's part of the reason why film is subjective. And it's one of those things where there are those movies I see that I think are technically and just completely brilliant, but aren't necessarily ones that I keep me talking. But in general, three great picks. I think they're all. I haven't seen Midsummer, but the other two I think are legitimately great movies, and I understand their merits, and I understand why they got nominated and even won the awards that they did.
You got to see Midsummer. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I've heard it's great.
So with all that you do right now, with the baseball postgame videos, with the Locked On Tigers podcast, with Maize and Brew, and all your movie reviews, what does the future look like for you? What do you plan on doing? What do you think your future will look like in 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's kind of the $1 million question now, and it's a question I've struggled to find an answer to. I'm very good at analyzing my strengths and weaknesses. I'm good at a select few things. I can talk sports, I can talk movies, but after that we kind of get into some trouble, and it's been frustrating because I've seen people with smaller audiences do more with what they have, getting sponsors and stuff. But, there's those people clearly have some sort of business savvy and like an undeniable confidence. And, you see these kids like on TikTok who are making millions for, essentially kind of doing nothing. And that's not even me being bitter about it. That's how you play the system. I think that's dope. Look, the ultimate goal, and I'm going to give myself a little bit more time here, and I might even be more lenient than I've even said I was going to be, because this pandemic has thrown off so much. I mean, there's so many content creators who have struggled, especially people in the fields that I'm in. The ultimate goal would probably be to find some sort of way to monetize my content. The Twitter stuff is great, and I've got an audience built in there, but I don't think that monetization through Twitter is necessarily a possibility. YouTube maybe, and it's part of the reason why I brought back the movie reviews, and I'm going to continue to try to pump those out. And that would be the end goal, but at the same time, I'm giving myself kind of like a year here to reevaluate, and I'll weigh my options. So if we get to my 26th birthday, which will be next June, and I feel like I'm kind of in a similar spot or haven't moved forward, there will be some serious reevaluation, because look, in all honesty, I would love to continue doing what I'm doing right now, but and part of the reason why I've been able to be as consistent as I have been, essentially not missing like a Tigers game, not missing, and with a handful, maybe in 4 years that I can think of, not missing like a Michigan basketball game or football game. Like, that's pretty remarkable consistency. And the reason for that is because outside of the podcast that I do have a part-time job that I work, 20, 25 hours a week. And, I live at home, and at some point I would like to move out. And if that means having to sacrifice something, so be it. But I'm going to give myself more time. The end goal is monetization. How I would achieve that is something I'm still trying to figure out. But as far as what the future holds, it's a lot of question marks. But I'm not going to stop. Like, I'm never going to even if I have to make sacrifices and maybe not do Tigers post games, every game. I'm not. Making the videos and putting out the content is too much fun for me to ever stop doing.
looking back on your past right now, do you regret anything you've done in the world of podcasting or reviews or post-game videos?
It's a good question. Yeah, quite a bit. And there's a lot of it that I regret, just based on, but that I look. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. There's a lot that I regret that I look back on and say, well, you know what? That's forgivable because you were young. I mean, when I started doing this, I was 21 years old. I was still in college, and I didn't know what this was going to be. I basically, viewed myself at the time as the kid in the back of the classroom who hurled spitballs at the teacher, not knowing it was going to grow into what it's grown into. And I think, look, one of the things I wouldn't say I'm super regretful for is the rhetoric. I have a tendency to be remarkably vulgar. Some of that I regret, but not really, because I think that there is a niche for that. It's more a lot of some of the personal stuff that I think has that I regret, because was remarkably impulsive, and I would just say stuff, and sometimes that would be very beneficial because people would respond to that and be like, wow, this guy, he speaks off the cuff. But there does come a point where you have to grow up a little bit, and I know of at least one, I'm sure there's more, major journalists and or sports radio personalities in this state who are not outspoken, but I've found out through inner circles, are not huge fans of my work. And I think at least one of those was somebody who I probably got into a spat with on Twitter, and another one of those people is just somebody who wasn't a huge fan of my content, and that's fine. I think there's been a legitimate growth there. That's one thing I am proud of, is that the whole thing of doing the rants every single game, talking about every single game like it's Game 7 of the World Series, that was never going to be sustainable. That's a one-note thing. I think growing evolving into other sports and talking about that stuff, I think has shown a level of maturity that wasn't there several years ago. I have admittedly burned a few bridges here, and it was never my intention, but I do think as well, I probably represented, and this was completely accidental. This is one thing that I regret, that, or not regret, but this is one thing that I did that I didn't even know at the time. I probably at the time represented kind of a almost frat boyish type of mentality, kind of this rebellious anti-journalism type of mood that I didn't mean to have. I think you probably at the time you see this kid who's 21 years old, filming in his car, probably, suburban college student, kind of punkish, who felt like he could maybe beat the system and work his way up without actually, I think a lot of people viewed putting in the hard work or getting an education, just trying to do it through these cheap rants. And that was absolutely never my intention. Like, I just wanted to talk about sports. It just so happened that it blew up into something it did. And I think it took me a while, but I have adjusted to knowing that I actually have like some, I mean, not a ton, but like some power in terms of what people pay attention to on social media. So there's definite regrets. There's definitely definite bridges that I've burned. There's definite mistakes that I've made that I've had to come to terms with living with. But for the most part, a majority of the ones that I've made are just part of growing up.
Where can people listen to the podcast, and where can people watch the movie reviews?
My mainstay, you can follow me on my personal Twitter at Castellani 2014. That's at CASTELLANI 2014. There you'll find the links to my other podcast, The Brewcast, on MazonBrew.com, which I do with Anthony Broom and Luke Giardi. Great guys. That's a lot of University of Michigan sports-based podcast that I really enjoy doing. You will find there my Twitter page for my Locked On Tigers podcast. That's at Locked On Tigers. Go there, subscribe on iTunes, and also in the link to my personal Twitter, or in my bio, to my personal Twitter, you will find the link to my YouTube page where I'm currently reviewing films and doing video essays about movies. I'll be having some more up later this week. I really want to get those numbers up. Let's get to 1,000 subs and those 4,000 watch hours required to apply for a partnership. We're 1,000 subs. I think we'll get to. It's the other thing. That's going to take some work, but if people people become dedicated and spread the word, I would really, really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to retweet your next movie review.
Thank you. I appreciate that, man.
And thank you for the interview, man. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Go check out his work. And to check out this interview and past interviews that I've done, go to my YouTube channel, James Paxson. And as always, thank you to the guest.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.